We're in Leviticus chapter 16, and we're going to be talking about the Day of Atonement today. But I think it's important that we stop and back up again and put context here, because there have been some really, really good questions along the way, and I think some of them we're starting to get the answers to. So let's remember that the children of Israel have just left Egypt, that they are trying to learn how to deal with God living in the middle of their camp, living amongst them. And this should correlate to us, because we need to understand that God is living in us as well, possibly even a closer connection. So they're concerned because they've seen how God destroyed Egypt. They've seen how God punished them. And so the concept comes into their mind about, okay, how can we live with this perfect, with this just, with this pure God, Jehovah? How can we live with him right here with us and him not destroy us? Now, it's important that we make a note here that they're not worried about God being whimsical and destroying them. They're not worried about him being capricious, as many of the gods of the nations were. They're worried because he's predictable. They realize that he is pure. Now, let's stop and talk about pure for just a minute. If somebody, I think we'd all be kind of amazed, but if somebody was to set a bar of pure gold here, what is in that bar? Gold. There's nothing else. You don't think of only the center being pure. The whole thing is supposed to be pure. And that's the way that we see the camp of Israel. God is in the center, and they realize that they are not as pure as God is. So there's this contagion, if you want to talk about it, that they have to deal with. So they're concerned that God, being predictable, doing what's right, how can they stay with him? So what has he done? What has he given them? What has he done to help them understand they can live with him in their midst? Well, number one, he said, okay, I want you to understand the difference between the clean and the unclean, between the pure, the holy, and the common, the holy and the profane. So he said, okay, I'm going to give you some directions. I'm going to give you some of these things. And we've seen these, and these are just a few verses. Most of these can be found in multiple places. But Leviticus 19:2 said God is saying, you shall be holy because I'm holy. A lot of times it says, be ye holy, telling them to be holy because I'm holy. Not me, but God. And so we see this type of thing. He's saying, okay, you need to be like me. And they say, how? And so he gives them directions so they can see between the clean and the unclean. Now, the problem with the clean and the unclean is that they could not live without becoming unclean at times with the directions he gave them. For instance, one of the major uncleanness came about with childbirth. A woman would be unclean for 40 days if she had a male child and 80 days if she had a female child. And I don't remember who it was. I think it was Cherry. They said, I want to know what sin she committed, because it said that she had to have, when she offered the sacrifice, the priest would offer atonement for her. It's a good question. And so we need to kind of look at the difference and the similarities between clean and unclean, sin and no sin, I guess, purity. Also, Leviticus, we see he gave them between the clean and the unclean and the holy and the common, Leviticus 10:10. And last week we were in chapter 15, and there was a summary verse that is important. And it was 15:31. And the reason it's important is because he's saying, I'll read it to you. Thus ye shall keep the people of Israel, he's talking to Moses, thus ye shall keep the people of Israel separate from their uncleanness, lest they die in their uncleanness by defiling my tabernacle that is in their midst. So we see that uncleanness, as we see the children of Israel, and as we approach chapter 16, we see the children of Israel with God in their midst. And chapter 16 is all about how they can do that. It's about the Day of Atonement. The Day of Atonement was so important to the Hebrews that in a lot of the Hebrew writing, and in a lot of the ways it was talked about, when they would talk about the Day of Atonement, they didn't say the Day of Atonement. They said the day. That is the day. Now, if you think back, that should ring a bell with you, because we think about Hebrews in chapter 10, verse 25, when it talks about gathering together, encouraging one another, gathering together, the more that you see the day approaching. See, this is a term that the Hebrews understood. This was the big day. This was the most important day of the year. If you talked about a day, this was the day. So he also said, okay, not only here are directions, and so you know where you stand and how to take care of your uncleanness. He also gave them the sacrificial system, if you want to say that. Here's the sacrifices, whatever. And if you look in Leviticus 17:11, there's a few phrases in there. It's talking specifically, the context here is talking about eating blood, and that they were not supposed to do that because life was in the blood. But in the middle of it, it says, verse 11 said, for the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I, now I want to stop here where it says, and I. In Hebrew, that's an emphatic thing. It's like he's saying, and I, even I. He's making a point here. I gave it to you for the altar to make an atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that makes atonement by the life. So this is kind of where we get the concept or understand that life is the cost of atonement. Now, clean and unclean and sin, how do they relate? Let's talk about uncleanness first for a minute. Being unclean, I guess a good word is pollute. If you're unclean, you're polluting something. If you have that gold bar, the part in the outside of it's not pure, it's polluting the whole bar. And that's kind of the concept we see in chapter 15, verse 31, when he says, lest in their defilement, they defile my temple. So unclean kind of pollutes. So what do you do to correct pollution? What do you do to correct this? You clean it. You purify it. And so as we see all of these different things that made people unclean, when we see that they offer an offering for atonement, we see atonement is purifying. But that's not the way we think of it. When we talk about atonement, we think of atonement for sins. Well, by being unclean, it's kind of being a pollutant, but by being polluting, it's endangering them that they might die in their sins. See, you see the connection there? It is in danger. Sin, by the contrast, endangers How does sin endanger us? Yes, it separates us from God. That's not what I was looking for, but that's absolutely correct. It endangers us by making us subject to the wrath of God. Once again, he's predictable. We know he's going to punish sin. So sin endangers us and also pollutes. So it's kind of like a difference in emphasis more than anything here. And atonement, if something is atoned for their sins, what's the parallel word that comes from your mind to your mind?
Forgiven.
Forgiven wasn't what I was looking for, but it's absolutely right. How about ransom? We say it's being bought back. It's being paid for, much like somebody is kidnapped and the family ransoms them back. It's an atonement. So atonement is a combination of a purification and a ransom. It works both ways. So we see the children of Israel gathering. Now, I think it's important also that we remember that Exodus chapter 40, I think it's verse 1 and 2, talks about where Moses is told on the first day of the first month of the second year, you're going to put the temple together, the tabernacle together. And in verse 17 of that chapter, he said he did. It says he did. So we see this is early in the wanderings in the wilderness. The children of Israel are still learning who God is. Why is that important to us? Because we're still learning who God is. We're still learning to live with God. So, let's see. Okay, so he has given them these rituals to perform for their cleanness. What were the rituals for? Several of you have made a connection here before. What did the rituals do? When they went through these rituals okay, let's back up a second. If they were going to be purified from their uncleanness, what types of things happened? What types of things purified their ritual uncleanness, their uncleanness?
Usually they'd be washed with water.
Washing with water, bathing, at least some part, if not all. What else? Sacrifice, blood sacrifice was one of the things they did. What else?
Sometimes they burned the vessel, like if a pottery vessel versus...
But some things were destroyed rather than clean. So there was a destruction that could clean something. What else?
Priesthood was always involved.
What?
Priesthood was always involved.
The priesthood was not always involved. Usually involved. But remember, there was some uncleanness, they were just unclean until the end of the evening. Yeah. So any kind of uncleanness, there were things that could clean uncleanness. One of them is time. Time would clean them or purify them. What else? I'm not going to say no. I don't think fire specifically, but it was involved in the sacrifices. So yes, but it's talking about purifying gold and that type of thing. Yes, fire is that, but I was thinking more of the ritual uncleanness. I'm thinking of one other thing. What other thing cleaned? How about anointing or sprinkling? And what was used? There's two different things that were used to clean. Blood was one of them.
Was it oil?
Oil. Right, oil. So these are the different things that cleaned, that purified the children of Israel of their uncleanness. Now, there may be something else, but those are the ones I remember. So what did these rituals actually do? Did they actually make them physically clean? Well, washing helped, I'm sure, but that's not what we're talking about. What did these rituals do for the children of Israel? Obedience. They reminded them that, okay, we need to be clean, but it wasn't just ritual, it was also moral. They had to be clean morally. Now, how do we know that? Yeah, it's something that's there. We don't always think about it because we often always relegate the Old Testament to works, to rituals, but that's not what it was. If you remember the passage, we've already talked about it, Amos 5:21 through 24, where God says, I hate your sacrifices. Why did he hate them? He ordered them. He said, I want you to do this. Why did he hate them? Because they didn't mean it. They were just doing it. So I think sometimes we think of the Old Testament. We look at it through lenses that are very specific. And we say, oh, the Old Testament was about works. It wasn't about grace. But God gave them these things. That's grace. God looked upon them with favor. That's grace. Where did it all start? Well, it started with creation. But it started for the Hebrews when Abraham was looked on with favor. So it is about grace. That's there. It's always been there. We don't always look at it. So let's go to Leviticus chapter 16 before I run out of time. The first verse. The Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron when they drew near before the Lord and died. Let's stop there for just a second. So this is after the event of Nadab and Abihu. Now, we don't know exactly when this happened. We think it was fairly quickly after the erection of the tabernacle, but we don't know. So we know this is after that. So it's after that Lord talked to Moses, and he told, verse 2, and the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron your brother not to come at any time into the holy place inside the veil. Now, many versions say not to come all times. And we know what this means is don't just come anytime you want to, because of what's later said in the verse. He says, this is the way I want you to come. It's not that you can't ever come, but I want you to come a specific time in a specific way. Excuse me. And tell Aaron your brother not to come at any time into the holy place inside the veil before the mercy seat that is on the ark, so that he may not die. Why would he die? For I will appear in a cloud over the mercy seat. But in this way, Aaron shall come into the holy place. So what the Lord is telling Moses is, you tell Aaron he's not supposed to come into the holy place, the Holy of Holies as we call it, anytime he wants to. He doesn't just come in here. He's saying, this is the way I want you to come. This is how it works. Okay, so from here down through verse 4, Hebrew writing comes into play here. It tells us something, it kind of maybe adds something else in, and it goes back and tells us a little more detail about what he's already told us and whatnot. So we're going to bounce around just a little bit in here to try to get this together. The last half of verse 3. This is how he's supposed to come into the holy place. With a bull from the herd for a sin offering and a ram for the burnt offering, he shall put on the holy linen coat and shall have the linen undergarment on his body, and he shall tie the linen sash around his waist and wear the linen turban. These are the holy garments. He shall bathe his body in water and then put them on. So we see, when we read this, it says, okay, he's supposed to put on these. Then he's supposed to bathe his water and put them on. He put them on. He's just saying, okay, you're going to be wearing these, but before you come in, I want you to bathe. Now, once again, why was he bathing? Because the high priest was unclean. He was cleansing himself so that he could offer a sacrifice for Israel. And the bull and the ram are for Aaron and his family, not for the children of Israel. So verse 5 then says, okay, little side note here. Not only is he going to take a bull and a ram in, he's going to take from the congregation of the people of Israel 2 male goats for a sin offering and 1 ram for a burnt offering. So it's kind of like, okay, let's get all this together. You're going to need these things before you do this. He says, okay, so you get these together. Now you bathe. Now you put on these garments. Verse 6. This is almost like a title about what's going to happen later. It's like, okay, this is what's going to happen. You know, the comment, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to tell you what I told you. He says, okay, this is the way you come. This is what you're going to do. And Aaron shall offer the bull as a sin offering for himself and shall make atonement for himself and his house. Now, does that mean that at this specific time he's going to do that? No, because we see later, he's told later to make the offering. This is kind of like a heading saying, okay, so this is what you're going to do. And then verse 7 through 10 talks about the children. This is a separate topic from him making the offering to him for himself. Then he shall take the 2 goats and set them before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And Aaron shall cast lots over the 2 goats, one for the Lord and the other lot for Azazel. Now, many of you, your versions of your Bible will say for a scapegoat. And I'm going to stop here long enough to discuss this briefly. Azazel is a word much like Jehovah. It's not a translation. It's the word kind of moved over, transliterated. Scapegoat is probably, what does scapegoat mean? If somebody is made a scapegoat, what are they? This is from how we use the word today. What does it mean when somebody's made a scapegoat? They're set up to take the blame for something. Yeah. And that's exactly what's happening here. Now, I'm going to mention it because if you read commentaries, you're going to see it. There are some people that say, oh, this is the name of a demon out in the desert. Well, that makes no sense with God. God says, no, you don't offer sacrifices to demons. So we pretty much can be assured that's not what this is. The word itself is a very unused word. So the exact meaning is not sure, which is why some versions just transliterate it instead of translating it. But it comes from a word that kind of means like cut off. When the children of Israel thought of being cut off, what did they think of? Being put outside the camp, being separated out, being put away. It also kind of gives the connotation of going away and never coming back, which all of those make sense to the word of scapegoat, we think, in the context here. So if somebody comes up and starts saying that the children of Israel were sending this goat out as a sacrifice to a demon, say, no, that's not what it is. That's not it at all. The only thing that even came close to making it sound reasonable was one author, I said, well, it could have been read that said, it could have been that they were placing all of the sins on this goat and God was sending it out to the devil saying, oh, here's all your sins back. I don't think that's what it was. I think that the translation scapegoat meets the criteria for what is going on here.
I think this kind of follows the theme of exile throughout the
Yes.
Bible. Like, sin is exile. You're exiled out of the camp. You're exiled out of the presence of God. And so all these sins are exile. Just like Adam and Eve were, just like literally Cain was, everyone, Israel, you're exiled. And that's what this is.
So that's kind of, I just wanted to make a brief comment on that, but simply because of the context and the fact that some commentators seem to make a strange connection here. But this also ties back, we see it with the turtle doves when they would release one and when they were being cleansed, sometimes they would kill one, then release one. It all kind of comes into it. It's going away. We're putting this away from us. Now, just briefly, don't have to say anything, but excuse me. But how does this relate to us? How do we treat sin, especially when it's forgiven? How do we deal with these things? How do we let God live in us? Okay, so Verse 9, and Aaron shall present the goat on which the lot fell for the Lord and use it as a sin offering, but the goat on which the lot fell for Azazel shall be presented alive before the Lord to make an atonement over it, that it may be sent away into the wilderness of Azazel. And another thing, one other thing that Azazel could mean would be sent out to a desert place type thing, a nowhere land, if you want to call it that. So at verse 11, excuse me, starts back and gives us detail now about Aaron and what he's going to do and how he's going about it. So far we've seen an introduction that says, okay, you're going to make these offerings. We've seen an introduction that says you're going to need these things. Verse 11, and Aaron shall present the bull for a sin offering for himself and shall make atonement for himself and for his house. So the priest had to make an atonement for himself. That's interesting because Hebrews talks about that. Remember that. Verse 12, and he shall take a censer full of coals of fire from the altar before the Lord, and 2 handfuls of sweet incense, beaten small, and he shall bring it inside the veil, and put the incense on the fire before the Lord, that the cloud of the incense may cover the mercy seat that is over the testimony, so that he does not die. Now let's stop here just for a second. Concept here, picture in your mind what is being done. The incense is creating a smoke. He's taking it into a fairly small room and filling the room with smoke because God is going to appear in a cloud. How do you tell the difference between cloud and smoke? That's about it, I guess. I didn't even think of that. They look the same, mostly. So the concept here is he can't see me, so he won't die by coming into my presence. And he shall take some of the blood of the bull. Oh, okay. So here we see he's got the blood of the bull already. So we see a difference between the actual sacrifice and the killing. Because before he comes in, he's had to have killed the bull. But we're told later he's going to actually put it on the altar. So we see a little bit here that we may not have noticed before. He shall take some of the blood of the bull and sprinkle it with his finger on the front of the mercy seat on the east side. And in front of the mercy seat, he shall sprinkle some of the blood with his finger for 7 times. 7 is a symbolic number, especially in the Old Testament. What does it mean? Completeness is like perfect is the concept here. It's sprinkled 7 times. It's cleaned. He's cleaning, purifying, maybe I should say, the things of God. Remember the purification offering? That was to purify the things of God. Now we shift to the children of Israel. Then he should kill the goat of the sin offering that is for the people. So he's killed the bull. He sprinkled the bull. Now he goes and kills the goats for the people. And he goes inside the veil and do with the blood as he did with the blood of the bull. So he's doing the same thing. First for himself and then for the people. We often think, okay, he's purifying the people. He's purifying what the people have done. They have contaminated. They have polluted. And so they're purifying, they're cleansing that. Verse 16, thus he shall make atonement for the holy place because of the uncleanness of the people of Israel and because of their transgressions, all their sins. And so shall he do for the tent of meeting, which dwells with them in the midst of their uncleanness. So you see all this coming together now. He's cleaning all these things that have been polluted. Why? Okay, let's get real. Aaron went into the holy place 1 time a year. How did he pollute the Holy of Holies? How did he pollute that? The children of Israel never went in there. How did they pollute it? by being unclean. Not by physically coming in and touching it, which is what was happening earlier when we were talking about the sacrifices. When they said, okay, we're making this sacrifice if somebody is unclean and they defile, pollute something, then they shall offer the sacrifice, and the sacrifice was to clean it. This was simply by association. How does that relate to us in association with sin? Makes us think about our lives a little bit. Okay, verse 17. This is a little, 17 through 19 is a little bit of a extra instruction, I guess you could say. It's not about this. It starts off saying, and nobody's going to go into the tent of meeting while he's doing all this. So it's like, okay, he's going to do these things. And after he starts, none of the other priests are going into the tent of meeting, the holy place or the Holy of Holies. It is just Aaron, or the high priest at the time. So no one may go into the tent of meeting from the time he entered in to make atonement in the holy place until he comes out and has made atonement for himself and for his house and for all of the assembly of Israel. Then he shall go out to the altar that is before the Lord and make an atonement for it. Okay, so he's made it inside. The altar is outside in the court, so now he's going outside to make an atonement for the altar. He's going to put the same blood that he's used inside on the horns of the altar. Let's read on. And it shall take, shall take some of the blood of the bull and some of the blood of the goat and put it on the horns of the altar all around. And he shall sprinkle some of the blood on it with his finger 7 times and cleanse it and consecrate it from the uncleanness of the people of Israel. So we understand cleansing. What is consecrating? What is consecrating? That's saying, okay, we're going to dedicate this. This is set aside for God. So yes, we're consecrating. We're making this something that is used only for God. And of course, yes, we're supposed to be consecrated. So think about that. So here we see that not only are they cleansing, but they're consecrating. And if you go back and think of the very first offering we talked about, the whole burnt offering, where everything was burnt to God. Part of the purpose there was saying, I'm dedicating myself to God. I'm pledging myself to God. That's part of that sacrifice. It's saying, you're God, I'm me, you're my God. You are my everything. Okay, so verse 20. And this is back talking about the sacrifices. And when he has made an end of the atoning for the holy place and for the tent of meeting and the altar, he shall present the live goat. Now this is the goat that was chosen for God, not the one that was chosen to go out in the wilderness. Excuse me, I said that backward. This is the one, the live goat, not the one that was dead that had been offered. This is the live goat. This is the one that's going out into the wilderness. I said that wrong, excuse me. And Aaron shall lay both his hands on the head of the goat and confess over it all of the iniquities of the people of Israel and all of their transgressions and all of their sins. Now, do you think he said, and Daryl did this, and Josh did this? No, I don't think he did that. I think it's talking more of a general thing, but he's confessing the fact that they all sinned, that they all had been unclean and endangered and polluted, that they all had not been holy as they should have been holy. And that we can really relate to that if we think about it. It doesn't take us long to take these terminologies and apply them in the New Testament. And that's part of the Old Testament being a shadow of the New Testament, things to come. It's to help us better understand the laws of Christ and the atonement, the purification, and the ransom that Christ gives us. And And he shall put them on the head of the goat and send it away into the wilderness by the hand of the man who is in readiness. Now, as far as I know, I don't remember anywhere in the Bible where it says how this person is picked out. Would you want to be the person that took this goat that had all of the sins of Israel laid upon it out into the wilderness? I don't know. It's like, okay, it's kind of an honor. Okay, I don't want to be that close to all the sins. It's just a weird thing. We're not told how this person was picked, whether it was a priest. We don't know. But somebody was in readiness. Somebody had been appointed. Somebody was going to take this goat out into the wilderness, and it was already decided. The goat shall bear all their iniquities on itself to a remote area, and he shall let the goat go free in the wilderness. Okay, so we see this person takes the goat and he goes out. Now I'm going to skip ahead in a minute. What do you think that person did before they came back into the camp? They had been exposed to all these sins by taking the goat out. They purified themselves. They bathed before they came back in. And we see this same context with Aaron when he bathed before he starts the offering. So let's go on. Then Aaron shall come into the tent of meeting and shall take off the linen garments that he put on when he went into the holy place and shall leave them there. And he shall bathe his body in water in a holy place and put on his garments and come out. So he bathes, he puts on his clothes, he goes into the holy and the holy of holies. He makes the cleansing, does the atonement, makes the cleansing. Somewhere in here, the bulls and the goats have been killed. And now he goes back in and he takes off the linen garments. Now, the linen garments are not the normal apparel. It's not his high priestly apparel, you know, the Urim and the Thummim and all that, the vest. That's not what the linen garments are. They're different. So, therefore, this day, they're not as extravagant as his regular garments. Are you raising your hand? Okay. His regular garments. So after he does these, after he does the cleansing, he comes in and bathes again and puts on his regular garments. And come out to offer his burnt offering and the burnt offering of the people and make atonement for himself and the people. So now he's actually going to offer them on the altars. We know they had to be killed earlier. So they were killed, they were cut up, butchered, whatever you want to call it. All the things that had to be done that we learned about earlier were done. Now he's actually going to come out and put them on the altar. And the fat of the sin offering he shall burn on the altar. And he who lets the goat go to Azazel shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and afterwards he may come into the camp. Oh, back up. I forgot one earlier when we were talking about things that would cleanse. One of the things we talked about bathing, but also changing clothes and washing clothes were things that would cleanse too. I had forgotten that one. Okay, so and afterwards come into the camp. And the bull for the sin offering. So we see this little side note here, and then it comes in. And the bull for the sin offering and the goat for the sin offering, whose blood was brought in to make atonement in the holy place, shall be carried outside the camp. Their skin and their flesh and their dung shall be burned with fire. And he who burns them shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and afterward he may come into the camp. So we see this picture of the purification and the sending of the sins out of the camp. And then before someone can come back into the camp, they have to bathe. They have to be cleaned again because they have been in contact with those sins. Or at least that's the assumption we make, but that's the reason they had to do it. So once again, it's real easy for Daryl to say, wow, I don't take sin quite that seriously. And that's something we can learn here. How serious this was. The results here, verse 29. And it shall be a statute to you forever, that in the 7th month, okay, so this is the 7th month of the 2nd year, because this is the first year that they've had the tabernacle. The 7th year, on the 10th day of the month, ye shall afflict yourselves, and shall do no work, either the native nor the stranger who sojourns among you. For on this day shall atonement be made for you to cleanse you. You shall be clean before the Lord from all of your sins. Oh, I didn't realize I was running so late. Real quickly, anybody have a comment about afflicting yourselves? What does he mean by that? Is there another translation that somebody has that makes more sense? Fasting is one of the things that people think this could have been.
NASB says, you shall humble your souls.
So the concept here is, okay, I am going to be minimalized, I guess is a good way of putting it. God is the important person. God is doing the atoning. God gave us the sacrifices. God gave us the system. God gave us the blood so that all this could happen. So, okay, I am going to be humble. Many people thought that at a minimum this was fasting for that day. We don't know that, but that's kind of what most people seem to think. It is the Sabbath of a solemn rest to you, and ye shall afflict yourselves. It is a statute forever. And the priest who is anointed and consecrated as priest in his father's place shall make atonement, wearing the holy linen garments. He shall make atonement for the holy sanctuary. He shall make atonement for the tent of meeting and for the altar. And he shall make atonement for the priest and for all of the people assembly. And it shall be a statute for you forever, that the atonement may be made for the people of Israel once in the year because of all their sins. And Aaron did as the Lord commanded Moses. Now, you read this chapter, you go through and you're reading Leviticus, and you read this chapter, and it doesn't really stand out as anything special until you see how it was dealt with by the Hebrews. The Hebrews, this was a very, very important, this was kind of the monument. This was how they were allowed to live with God. Next week, we're going to go into 17, but before we do, we're going to run into Hebrews just a few minutes. So read chapter 25 of Hebrews, because this is giving us context today for that. It tells us how Christ is such a better high priest than Aaron was, or any of them.
What chapter in Hebrews was that?
Hebrews chapter 10, excuse me. I said 25. You are correct. Thank you for correcting me. Hebrews chapter 10. It tells us how important this was to us. And then we'll get into chapter 17. Thank you for your attention and comments today.